In this episode of the Backyard Brewer, we're going to check and see if this beer is ready for bottling, and if it is, then we're going to bottle it. Once fermentation stops and you're not seeing any bubbles in the airlock anymore, then it's time to test and see if your beer is finished. So this is the Cooper's Ale that we put on a couple of weeks ago, and I'll put a card up the top to show you that brew day. That's been sitting for a couple of weeks. Fermentation actually stopped a couple of weeks ago, and it's just been sitting in a nice cool dark place waiting. Why I did that is I didn't want to cold crash it, because I didn't want all of the yeast to settle out of this. I wanted some yeast to stay in there, but I wanted most of the solids to settle out. So what we should have in here now is a mixture of a little bit of yeast in here that's going to go into the bottles for fermentation. But the first thing we've got to do is test it and make sure that it's finished fermenting. So as I said, activity in the airlock stopped a while ago. Now, I loosened this lid before because these lids can be difficult to undo. I didn't want to struggle on camera. So I'm putting that down on a clean piece of towel, just in case it isn't finished and I've got to put it back on. I don't want it to come into contact with any surfaces. All of our equipment has been cleaned and sanitized. Now, there's a little bit of pellicle in there. The smell test tells me that it's a rather sweet smelling beer, but it is a beer and it does smell nice. And I'm not too worried about the pellicle. Pellicle is just a white covering on the top. Sometimes you can get a little bit of bacteria in there. It may have been hiding in one of the crevices, or I may not have quite covered everything with sanitizer, but pellicle's fine. It's when it's coloured and gunky that you don't want to, and doesn't smell right, that you don't want to drink it. But a little bit of this white pellicle on top, I'm fine with that. So I'm going to insert the baster down below the level of the pellicle and suck up a big sample, and then put that into the tube. Looking good so far. That's not floating yet. Now, with this test tube, what that tells me is this has gone very dry. If it was a little bit of sugar in there, it would have been floating by now. And the thing to remember with basters is, as you lift them up, hold them vertical like that, or they will leak. If you put them slightly horizontal, see how that's leaked out? There's a lot of carbonation in there, so it's quite effervescent, and I was getting that smell of effervescence when I did put my nose in there. You can smell, I don't know what it is, there's something about that you can smell the effervescence. So, this has gone very dry. There is a little, as I said, a little bit of effervescence in there. There's a little bit of pellicle on top here. I did get some of that in there, and there's a bit of bubble in there. So I'm just going to have to wait a few minutes for that to evaporate. But I can tell now that this has gone quite dry. It's 1.00, I'd say 2 or 4. So the bubbles that are in there will make the hydrometer more buoyant and push it up. So it'll give you a higher reading than it actually is. And so if we gave that a bit of a stir, but one thing that would make this a little bit easier would be if I had something like an Anton Parr digital hydrometer. Anton Parr, if you're watching, I'm quite happy to do a review, because it's easy to get the gases out of it when you're using a syringe to take your sample. And also they use a much smaller sample size. So you don't need to use, that's 100 mils. Yep, I'd say about 105 mils of beer there. So that's about a third of a beer. And there is still, when I did that, I can see a lot of bubbles climbing to the top. So one thing that tells me is this isn't going to take a lot to carbonate. But it also tells me that it's ready to go in the bottle as well. So the next step is to get our bottles and sanitize them. All the other equipment that I would be needing is already in the sanitizer. So because this doesn't have a spigot on the front, I'm going to have to use an auto siphon to siphon the liquid out of this fermenter into a bottling wand and then into the bottles. And we'll show you that process in a minute. But the first step is to grab the bottles, throw them in the laundry sink with some sanitizer. The sink's been scrubbed, so there's no issues there. But throw them in there with some sanitizer and make sure that they're good and sanitized and clean. And then once we've got those bottles sanitized, then we can come back and start bottling. So all of my equipment has been thoroughly cleaned and sanitized, including my hands. The bottles have been sanitized and I've put 2 carbonation drops in each of those bottles. So carbonation drops, this is what they look like. They're just little hard lollies, hard candy. And they contain all of the sugar that the yeast are going to need in the bottle to restart fermentation and create the carbon dioxide that carbonates the beer. So in a 750ml bottle, you use 2 carbonation drops. In a standard 335 or 375ml bottle, you would only use 1 of these. If you put 2 of these in that bottle, it's going to overcarbonate and you will end up with a bottle bomb. So remember, 1 of these in a small bottle, 2 of them in a 750ml bottle. So I'm going to get this equipment out now. So what I have here is an auto siphon. I place this into the fermenter and I give it a couple of strokes like that, and being a siphon, it sucks the beer up and out, and then we attach it to this hose. That's not the best fit, but it will do. And then the other end of the hose goes onto the bottling wand. Now, when I've got this in the bottom of the bottle and I press down, there's a little valve there that opens and the bottle will start to fill up. And as soon as it gets towards the top of the bottle, I pull up and it stops siphoning. So then I can put that bottle up, grab the next bottle and start all over again. Now the other thing is that there's a little cap that goes onto the bottom of the auto siphon, and the reason that we have that cap is so that we don't put this down into the trube and yeast cake in the bottom of the fermenter and suck up all of that yeast. We want some of the yeast from in here to get in the bottle so that they restart fermentation, but we don't want to suck up that yeast cake. That would be quite nasty. So I'm going to put my first bottle down here. For the time being, I'm just going to rest the wand in there, and then I'm going to put the auto siphon into the fermenter. This could be a 2-person job. Okay, so that should start us off. And now when I press down, I might need to give it another pump. It can be a bit awkward with just one person. Might need to get lower. There we go. To start it off. So now I can bring it up. Remember, the lower you go, the faster it will siphon. Oh, there we go. We got to the bottom of that. There's a little bit too much airspace in there for me, so I will go again. There we go. That's still a bit too much. That will do. What we don't want is to leave a lot of oxygen in there. So again, bring it down lower. The lower I go, the faster it siphons. But any oxygen that ends up in the bottles, just remember that the yeast, when they activate, of course, they consume all of that oxygen. So we're not at too much risk of having oxidized beer. So that's it. I'm getting close to the bottom of the fermenter there, and I don't want to go any further because I don't want to suck the trube up and get that in the bottles. So I've got 20 bottles out of that. That's not too bad. The last thing to do, of course, is cap them. So the caps have been soaking in the sanitizing liquid while I've been bottling. So it's just a matter of pushing the cap on, twisting it until it's tight. So that's it. That's the end of our bottling day. Now you can probably see why I prefer kegging to bottling. It is a lot more effort. Now these are going to go into a black plastic tub into a dark, warm place for the next 2 weeks until they're ready. The reason they're going into a plastic tub is that if they do decide to explode, that will contain them. Now, how will I know when they're ready? At the moment, they're quite squeezy. When they're carbonated, they'll feel firm like an unopened Coke bottle. So just keep testing them every couple of days until they feel firm. Once they feel firm, then it's time to stop the fermentation in the bottle. Now there's 2 ways you can do that. I only recommend one of them because the other one's a bit of a pain and isn't very good with PET bottles. PET bottles tend to deform with heat. So one way of stopping fermentation is just throwing them into a fridge, and that's what I recommend. The second way of stopping fermentation is by pasteurizing them. And that means putting them into a warm water bath around, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, it's around 70 degrees from memory, for 10 minutes. I'll put the exact times up on the top of the screen. So those lids are on nice and tight. They will carbonate over the next few weeks. And when they're ready, it'll be time for tasting. It took a little longer than normal to bottle condition these. It's been a little cool on the cool side. We are in winter, so it took about 3 weeks to bottle condition them. I could tell because when you squeeze the bottle, it's quite firm. This particular bottle has been sitting in the fridge for about a week, just to let it mature a little bit, and because I had a chest infection, so I haven't been able to get around to much drinking. So when I look through this, it does look very clear. I can see a Krausen ring at the top there. That's normal because remember the yeast in here are chewing through those two carbonation drops to produce carbon dioxide. The other reason for putting this in the fridge for a week is to just allow that carbon dioxide to absorb more completely into the beer. Cold temperatures force that carbon dioxide into solution a lot quicker. Now because it's been laying on its side, there's also a little bit of sediment just down around here. There's a little bit of sediment in the bottle. This is a Cooper's Sparkling Ale. If you go to the Cooper's website, it answers the age-old question, do you roll your Coopers or not? Answer on the website, and I think I covered this off when we tasted the Cooper's Pale Ale in our Pale Ale tasting, is yes, you do roll your Coopers. So, keeping with tradition, I've always rolled it. I don't know why. I do. I went to uni with a guy from South Australia, and he always did this. So you just give it a couple of gentle rolls. That stirs up a little bit of the sediment, a little bit of the yeast. And because it's bottled, even the commercial version of this is bottle conditioned, you will get some sediment in the bottom of those bottles. So you roll them. Okay, when I open it, I don't know if you heard that, there, oops, oh, it's definitely carbonated. Let me just get a cloth. Even letting that pressure off gently, I still had a bit of a Mount Vesuvius. These may have been overfilled a little. I suspect that, I was talking to somebody at a homebrew club the other week. He only puts one carbonation drop into 750ml bottles because he prefers his beers to be at the lower end of that carbonation spectrum. So do I. I prefer lower carbonated beers. This is a sparkling ale. I think you probably need to put 2 in there because it does need to have that carbonation, that effervescence. Definitely very carbonated. You'll have to excuse the background noise. I just realised I left the door open and had the outside washing machine washing all the dog blankets and horse blankets and stuff, so it was a bit noisy. I apologise for that. Now, if this, I'm not sure where this fits into the BJCP style guidelines. It's an ale, obviously, but I'm not sure where within those styles it fits. But if you were judging it, you would definitely say good head retention. Head is thick and moussey, over-carbonated. It's cloudy, but it's supposed to be cloudy. It is clear in the bottle, or it was until I rolled it at least. It's a nice amber colour. It's got that almost a honey-like colour when you hold it up to the sunlight. Yeah, you can see shadows through it, but you can't see distinct figures through it. As for carbonation, yep, I can definitely, well, apart from the head obviously, I can definitely still see carbonation rising to the surface. Okay. Smell. Oh yeah, it's got that Cooper's smell to it. I'm not sure what it is, but I know Cooper's when I smell it. That's definitely got that Cooper's smell. It's malty, it's malt forward, but there's also those old world hops in there too. It's a very old style Australian beer. Definitely carbonated. There's just enough bitterness in there. It's only 3.9%, I think I calculated it out to. I did put it up earlier in the video, but I can't remember, that was over a week ago that I did that. No off flavours, it's quite bright. The malt isn't a heavy malt, it's quite a bright flavoured malt. There's just that hint of bitterness on the back of the palate.
it's definitely a Cooper's Sparkling Ale. That is a good kit. I like that. If you're looking to get into kits, I can recommend that one. If you like Cooper's Sparkling Ale, you'll like this. That's it for this episode. Visit us at backyardbrewer.com.au. From there you can check out all of our social pages. Give us a like and subscribe. Click the bell icon so that you receive all of the notifications when we release new content. And drop a comment if you feel like it. It's always good for YouTube to know that content is valuable. It helps get us up in the rankings. It helps get our videos out to other people who might be interested in this type of thing. And in the meantime, enjoy your hobby, but drink responsibly. See you next time.